Welcome back. So, last time I left you with the homework assignment to draw an eye. Did you do it? Well, whether you did or not, here's some possible drawings similar to what I've gotten when I've asked people to do this before. The top one is about as simple as you're going to get, although in a cartoon situation or an emoji, you can just have two dots and a line for a nose, and you'll know immediately it's a face with two eyes. But drawing an eye, the top one is pretty simple. The one right below it, I like better because somehow just having one circle looks kind of dead to me, empty. So I like having two concentric circles. The one below it completes the oval with an upper and lower lid. And then the final picture is a little more complex and showy with shadows and highlights to indicate where the light is coming from and the kind of curvature of the eyelids and the eye below it. But in all these cases, we're really just seeing a small part of the eye. Most of what you're seeing is the eyelids or the very front surface of the eye. Behind those eyelids into your skull, basically there's the orbit, and that's where most of your eye sits, as we see in this picture. Now, maybe you drew something like these. A goat, a horsefly eye. After all, I didn't say that it has to be a human eye. Now this brings us up to the question of today's talk. What is an eye? And even more broadly, what is vision? Now, when we study an eye scientifically, we like to divide things into categories. There's a comment in both science and medicine about lumpers and splitters. And sometimes you like to lump things together into broad pictures and other times split into various kinds of ways of organizing things. So when we organize the study of vision into those with eyes and without, we consider an eye an organ that is attached to some sort of nervous system. All right, I'm not as fond of that. I say we, meaning that's what scientists do, but is that really what vision is? I mean, what do we need to do when we see? What is vision? All right, first you have to sense light. Fine. So you have to have some sort of receptor, some sort of mechanism, some chemical that will receive the light and change to respond to the energy in the light. Then you have to see where the light is coming from. And there's many ways to do this, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. But it could be the shape of the eye. You also don't want light just bouncing from everywhere into your eye. So you have to have either pigment or, in our case, the white of the eye, the sclera that's pretty opaque. It's not totally opaque, so that you know which direction the light is coming from. And it's not just this scattering of light degrading an image. So we're already starting to see part of our theme for today, which is form and function. Now, all right, we know where light is coming from. We do need to have some mechanism to respond to that light. Otherwise, it's really not vision. So let's ask, does a plant see? And I would say, well, they certainly have vision. Here we see a plant bending towards the light. A plant does photosynthesis. Now, just to remind you, photosynthesis is where you take the energy from light and you capture that energy as chemical energy. Plants and certain algae and bacteria can do that. We can't, unfortunately. So the plant, to be most efficient, has to face the light. And we see a little plant in a flower pot bent towards the window. That's called heliotropism because it's moving towards the light. Darwin was quite aware of this. And as a matter of fact, one of his books was on the movement of plants. And in fact, he, as we see in this picture from that book, thought of not only in terms of bending towards light, but also in terms of the rhythms of seasons and days and night. And here we see him very kind of poetically showing a plant awake on the left and on the right, asleep in the dark. Is this just plants? Uh, Not at all. Here we see a schematic, a cartoon of a bacteria. This is a bacteria that's spherical and it's called cyanobacteria. It also does photosynthesis. This class of bacteria is very ancient. Uh, Now, it really kind of looks like a little eyeball. It's round, and because it's round and has a curved surface, it focuses light that's coming in this case, from one side and the left, and it focuses it onto the other side. Now, notice that there are these photoreceptors, that is something that receives and registers light, studded throughout the membrane all around this bacteria. That means there's information encoded here. When the light hits one of those spots, it knows that the light is coming from the opposite direction, so it knows how to orient itself and where to go to maximize its photosynthesis. So light received and reacted to. Now, this is a one-celled creature, and it doesn't really have an eye like we think of it. After all, it only has one cell, but sure looks like a bit of an eye. Some of its membranes are used like a cornea and a lens. That is, they will focus onto what's called a retinal body. It is very close to having an organ, but this is a one-celled creature. It's called a dinoflagellate. The dinoflagellates are plankton. That is, they float in the ocean, and they respond to light. There's certainly no neural tissue or brain. It's a single-celled organism. Here we see another single-cell organism. This is called Eugenia, and it, as you see, has a photoreceptor, what's called a eye spot, and it has pigment there that shields the light coming from other directions. This eye spot is towards the front of the organism by the flagellum, so it can also move towards light. Now, these last few have been single-celled organisms, but there's also earthworms. Earthworms have photoreceptors in their skin. These are associated with touch receptors, and they're mostly in the front towards the head of the earthworm. That's important because earthworms have to know when they come up out of the ground. They're really made to live in the soil. They need the moisture. They breathe through the oxygen in the water in the soil, and plus it's kind of safer down there than, the old early worm or early bird catches the worm. So they do come out usually at night, and they will go back down in the soil if they sense that it's very bright. We also can look at planaria. Planaria also have these eye spots, as we see here. It looks a little like those are eyes with pupils. It's not hard for us to imagine those being eyes. Planaria are flatworms. These are really just eye spots, and that's, again, the pigment shielding the eye spots, so it again has some directionality to it. It knows where the light's coming from. Planaria are fascinating. They're often used in biology classes because you could chop them up and they'll regenerate their heads and their bodies. And interestingly, they store memories throughout their nervous system. They don't have a central brain, but they can remember. Now, once we start really talking about eyes, we could talk about starting with a pigment spot and an eye spot, but then we soon get to a little bit more complex, as we see here. We see cups, pinhole eyes. Now, a pinhole is just a very small opening. There's nothing to focus, but for reasons we'll come to later in another talk, a pinhole, just like a small pupil, actually helps focus light on a specific area. So it has some focusing ability. Then we start, all of these are open to the water. These are all going to be in aquatic animals. You can't have something like this open to air. Now you can have a primitive enclosed eye, and then we add bells and whistles as we go along this diagram to adding lenses and corneas and get finally what they're calling a complex eye. There is some benefit to having even the simplest eye. As we saw with these one-celled organisms, there's benefit because they can get some directionality, whether it's light, dark, whether they'll have some information just from having a simple eye spot, just a few photoreceptors, a few chemicals that can see and register light. But let's say we have a simple cup eye, and here, well, even just like this, notice what we see here. You know that the light is coming from one side of this and not the other because of the shadow. And to exaggerate that, if we go like this, we can see, even without a heavy shadow, that it's going to hit the bowl at just certain spots. And as we move, that changes. So a little show and tell there. Basically, even a simple cup eye is going to give information about where light is coming from. It may give information about a shadow coming across, which could be a predator or prey. So even a simple cup eye is functional. But there are also different kinds of eyes that are designed completely differently from what we're just talking about. One common type is the compound eye, which has many facets or segments. These are found quite often in arthropods like insects and crustaceans, which are shrimp, lobster, and the like. Now, trilobites are ancient arthropods that go back more than 500 million years. And here, circled in yellow, we see their compound eye. So we know that this was part of the evolutionary history of animals going back over 500 million years. These really work well. Some people think that indeed developing these eyes drove evolution, because once you can see pretty good, you're harder to catch and be prey. And if you're a predator, it's easier for you to catch others, which again would be a driver for evolution. Now, compound eyes take many forms, but basically what you have are each is many facets, each one that has a focusing element at the top, as in the top in, say, this picture, a photoreceptor, and pigment, because you want pigment shielding from both sides so that each one of these segments is seeing pretty much what it's seeing and not getting scattered light from the sides. Now, you know that these work pretty well. If you ever tried to swat a fly, you know that, they see good and they see fast. They can even get very good resolution of the images. So why not have compound eyes? Well, as we see from our friend, that there's not a functional way we can do that. For us to have those kind of eyes, they'd have to be and get the kind of images we do, the kind of resolution we do. These eyes would have to be a meter that is about 3 feet across. So insect eyes, shrimp eyes won't work for us. And for that matter, who says you only have to have one type of eye? Now, this is true mostly for invertebrates, and they can have more than one type of eye. Here's an example of a box jelly. This is a very jellyfish. It's very, we don't say fish. Jellies are a very basic organism. They go back way, way back in evolutionary history. And here we see one that we don't know how long ago these may have developed, but we see a box jelly with a pit eye, a slit eye, an eye with lenses, a more complex eye. 3 different eyes, at least in one organism. Now, eyes are not out of context. The context of the organisms, the animal's lifestyle, whether it does photosynthesis or whether it's a predator or prey, whether it's in the ocean or land. But it's also so it has to be in the context of the animal. And in vertebrates like us or owls or fish, they're in a head. Or same thing with insects. And for that matter, even worms, in a sense, even though they don't have truly separate heads, they're oriented for the direction the body's going to go to. So they're in a context. And here we see the context of a predator. A predator needs the eye straight ahead. A predator has to focus in on what's ahead of it and have good overlapping vision so it could really see an image that will be well focused and give an idea of depth so it can zero in on its prey. An owl can't really move its eyes. It has very shallow orbits. It doesn't have eye muscles. So it adapts by being able to move its head. By having these front-facing eyes, we give up some peripheral vision. Now, if you're prey, then you are likely to have your eyes on the side of your head, where you give up a little of that overlapping visual field and ability to judge distance in order to be able to scan the whole environment. Now, there's other form and function aspects. For example, pupils. Pupils are the defect in the iris, the opening in the iris that lets light in. The iris shape determines the pupil shape. Now, there are different types of irises. And pupils. There's here in this goat that we met earlier, a square but mostly or rectangular, mostly horizontal pupil. Now, that would be better for scanning a horizontal view. That's not well established, but that's mostly what we think is going on. On the other hand, we see this alligator where it's a vertical slit. Now, remember what an alligator is doing. It's kind of poking its head out of the water. And a lot of predators are like that. They don't need to scan the whole area. They just need to have this vertical slice. Then we have this insect. This is actually also a horsefly. You could tell the colors from the bottom, and you see how different it is on top. It's important to have a different optics for on top of the eye, because there you're looking for orientation to the sun, but you're also looking for predators, prey, and mates. So you have different areas of focus, different areas of the eye for different functions. Again, form and function. Another thing that we find is an interesting thing when we start thinking about eyes is that we cobble together eyes. These are in fact chimera. We use what we have to build an eye. What we see here is a chitin, and a chitin is a distant relative of that trilobite that we met earlier. And what they both have in common, or at least one thing, besides the obvious segments, which you might or might not have noticed back on our trilobite, is that they both have shells made of calcium carbonate. Now, the surface of our eyes, very surface, like the surface of the cornea and over the white of the eye, what's called the conjunctiva. That's modified skin because that's what we have. Well, they have shells made out of calcium carbonate, and the surface of their eyes, the focusing part of their compound eyes, are also calcium carbonate. That's right. Their eyes are in part made out of the same thing as their shells, a mineral, a calcium mineral. This is a basic theme in the way we as organisms are built. We're chimera. We put together new variations based on what we already have. So we see here form and function. And the important idea is that form is fluid. It's responsive. Evolution is a feedback loop. What seems to us solid, an organ, it's a given, an eye, it's really a process. It's really relationships. It's cause and effect. It's contingency, functions made manifest. Now let's remember, and another important idea is that there is no perfect eye. There's no crown of creation. There's no platonic eye that all eyes strive for. There's no ideal endpoint. No insect needs an eagle's eye any more than, my friend needed an insect's eye. And it really wouldn't work. And this also goes for eyes that are pretty similar. An owl needs an eye that has good night vision. An eagle doesn't. An eagle hunts in the day. A fish needs an eye that sees in water. And some fish have two focusing areas or two functional areas in each eye because they actually hunt insects outside the water. And so they'll be at the surface and they got to see both outside the water and in the water at the same time. Now, in the last talk, I talked about the Surangama Sutra, that ancient Buddhist text, where Buddha first asked, is vision in the eye? And well, we can answer that, right? Plants and single-cell organisms have a kind of vision without eyes. Worms do. So they want to know, is it day? Am I outside? Am I in the soil? How can I best orient to the sun? That's a kind of vision at least by the definition I'm taking here. Doesn't mean that they have eyes. It means they have vision. So no, you can't say that the eye is what defines vision. They're clearly not synonymous. So in science and medicine, we also talk about whether a cause is necessary and sufficient. So we know that an eye is not necessary for at least some level of vision, but is it sufficient? Well, let's step back a moment in our next talk and explore that question a bit more. And let's explore it by looking closely at something that's really more near and dear to ourselves, which is the human eye. So I'll see you in our next talk about the human eye.